Anne Gleeson, welcome to Unbroken.
Thanks, Alexandra. Lovely to talk to you from the other side of the world.
Yes, I think you're my first Australian guest. This is very exciting.
I feel honored.
So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got interested in the principles?
Okay. I grew up in a very traditional farming family in some ways, but all curiosity about the way that, the world worked, and I mean beyond the earth, And then in 2017, my mother was dying and I was caring for her. And then there was a creative workshop in the town I lived. And that was so surprising to me because I didn't think of things like that. Like generally it was agricultural meetings and that kind of thing. But anyway, I couldn't do it then because of the circumstances. But a year later, I joined that group. And it was run by somebody called Robin Emerson, who was a really beautiful creator. And she also was so interested in, these ways of operating in the world. And she lent me lots of books. And I just kind of ran with it and then enrolled in the next time the Change Coach Little School of Big Change course came up with Amy Johnson. And it was very liberating for me. I think, I realized how caught up in my thinking I was, how much of my own annoyance or sadness or whatever was to do with the way I was creating experience. So that was how I got involved in the beginning. And yeah, so I joined and, made connections with people, and that was really lovely. Yeah, so.
And so did Robin, was that the person's name you mentioned?
Mhm.
Did she, so you said she loaned you books, so some of them were three principles involved?
Yes, they were, well, Amy's books for a start, Amy Johnson's books, but
Mm-hmm.
also other books like Michael Singer and the person I really cottoned onto, it wasn't actually a book, it was Barb Patterson's podcast.
Podcast,
And
yeah.
because I was in business, it was very interesting to me, sort of looking at it from that point of view. So it was a whole range of things. And, I was hungry. So I, gobbled up a whole lot of things. Yeah.
Yeah. And had you, before that time, had you read, like, were you always interested in this kind of exploration?
I think like a lot, I've had this experience a few times thinking, yeah, but I already knew that, when I was 15 or whatever, just
Yeah.
that kind of knowing. But, this I suppose was giving me a bit of a language. And that's not to say, I that I sort of went with that in any way. I didn't. But even at uni, I went from this country kid going off to Monash Uni in Melbourne, and that was, so exciting for me. And I'd race around and go to all different courses and talks and anything that was my mind, was just being expanded in so many ways, or my heart or whatever. Yeah. So yes, I think I was a seeker always.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. And so then one of the things it mentions on your website is that you're a funeral celebrant as well as part of your work. So do, do you think that has been influenced at all by the principles?
Has the funeral work been influenced?
Yeah.
Yes, every single part of my life has. And
Mm,
yeah, I've worked in the area of bereavement care and, for more the whole funeral industry for probably 15 years or so. Now I'm not formally part of the funeral industry, but I work still as a celebrant making the ceremonies. But I work 2 days a week with aged care people at the end stage of life, and in palliative care, so people who are very close to the end of their life here.
hmm.
So most definitely, I've described the place I work, even though it's a happy place in many ways, as a reservoir of grief,
Hmm.
because so many people carry such heavy loads. And certainly, yeah, I think I mean, I'm not formally a coach in that setting, but that's why I was employed, because of my coaching work. So, uh,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, I think it's a little bit of the politics around counseling, coaching, that sort of thing. But um, I was lucky to have the combination of the funeral work, the bereavement work, the celebrant work. So, anyway, I just love the work sitting there with people who have lived a lot longer than me. And,
Mm.
yeah.
And you mentioned the reservoir of grief there too. Do you think this understanding has helped you personally, with feelings of grief? Or how, I guess what I'm asking is, how do you understand grief maybe now?
Well, I understand it now. I mean, I understand it as being, we are really when we're really grief struck, we're really caught up in that moment of the horror, the worst of it. And I suppose two things. One is, that I've learned not just with grief, but with other things, to really lean into that experience rather than resisting it. So
Mm,
that's something, that I will bring to people, not just in that coaching, but in general coaching as well. And I suppose too, it's the fluctuating, the old cloud analogy, that sometimes it's terrible and you can't bear to go on living another day without that person. And then, another time you're, out in the garden being reminded of their joyful presence, And I think too that lots of us have questions about, how life works. And I've become really interested in lots of the discussion lately on non-duality and thinking about the world differently environmentally because of that. Yeah, so
mm.
yeah.
Yeah, so like you said, it's really affected every area of your life.
Most definitely, yes. Yeah, and
Yeah.
some of my other coaching is like very practical kinds of things. People have come because I had quite an academic background, so sometimes it's people doing academic studies and not, being unsure about that or not confident, and other times it's people exploring their creativity or um, more, hesitation about taking on a new position or all different things like that. So I like the mix that I'm doing at the moment. Mm.
Mhm. Oh, nice. Oh, that's great. Um, and one thing your website mentioned too was you experienced a cancer diagnosis in 2020.
Mm.
And so could you talk about that and how that affected your understanding of thought, if at all?
Yeah, I find this so interesting because I mean, I'm not a person who goes around saying thanks for the gift of cancer,
Mm.
but it was a horrible, horrible time. But it wasn't. It's sort of what I just said about grief. It actually was a really special time. My cancer diagnosis coincided with the complete breakdown of a fairly awful marriage, loss of the business, some other sort of things that were going on that were hard to deal with. So it was a really, kind of on the surface, but it wasn't in another way. I just felt so drawn into nature. It was just I knew that's what my body needed to be healed. And so I would go out and just walk and, lean against the trees and that kind of thing. So I just felt very in touch with being just a little part of the world. And then I went through, the treatment during 2020. And of course, I don't know if you know, but the state I live in had the most severe restrictions in the world in terms of COVID. So we were
Mm,
very confined. So the um, experience of being in that meant that I was by myself a lot of the time. And that was okay. But it also, I had actually thought before COVID or before cancer I'm going to have 2020 as a dwelling year, just kind of being well, I didn't know quite how far much I'd be dwelling. But anyway, that was what happened. But then I think the most interesting thing of all was towards the end, I received an invitation, as did many people, asking if I would like to be a change coach. And this was with Dr. Amy Johnson. And I spoke to her on Zoom and we talked about it. And I said, look, I'm not really wanting to be a coach. I just want more understanding. And she said, well, that's fine. Heaps of people do the coaching and, don't do more. But I was, I think when you get the cancer diagnosis, it sounds so dramatic and you don't know if you're going to be alive in 3 months' time or, 3 years' time or 33 years' time. And I just had this hunger again. I was thinking, well, have if I have only a shorter time to live, then I really want to know more about this because just living in the moment and not resisting the cancer and the treatment and, some of the harder bits had been so helpful to me. And so I thought, well, if I have just a little bit of time, I want to be really living fully, with this, not resisting the anything and just going with dying early. Well, that didn't happen. Here I am.
Mhm.
Um, but anyway, I started the change coach training, and I think I was only like, the 2 lessons in or something. And of course, there's a practical component where we were all coaching. And even the first person I coached, I just loved it and it felt very natural to me. So, although I'd said to Amy, I'm not remotely interested in coaching, I pretty quickly was very interested. So, yeah, there was another slant then to my doing the course. Yeah, the
Yeah.
training
Oh,
coach training course, yes.
yeah. And so what can you pinpoint what it was about it that you really loved?
I think I actually felt useful, I could see things, um, that were hold-ups for people or whatever.
Mhm.
I mean, I've always loved listening to people and loved people's stories, and I think it was that real connection with people on a deeper level that I really liked.
Mhm.
But feeling useful is good too. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, we always
But
love
not
that.
saying those people would agree, but from my side, it felt good. Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah, it's a good feeling to feel useful.
Mm, yeah, but I think
Um,
the main thing was, I resisted the fearful kind of approach to the whole medical thing and just went with it
mhm,
and really took on such a strong connection with nature that I mean, I think I've always had that, but it was intensified immensely. Yes.
mhm, mhm.
Mm.
And so if during your cancer treatments and that kind of thing, um, you talked about how you tried not to resist what was happening.
Mm.
And can you maybe share a little bit about what that looked like? That lack of resistance?
Yeah, so just thinking that death could be part of my experience, and
Mhm,
so, like, not even really planning too much about it, just, taking that on, that, "Oh, well, maybe I do just have a short time to live," and, then other things would be, well, some of the treatment is quite painful, it's physically painful, and, I've joked about this with, the group, that, I'm on the other side of Australia and I'm remembering Amy talking about, pain and as being pressure or heat. But when you're actually here on the other side of the world with all the people in their white coats and you're trying to remember that, it doesn't ring quite as true. But in a way, that was it, that I wasn't I just thinking, well, it is just pain. It is, and I sort of had quite a reaction to some of the treatments, and well, that's what's happening, but also a little bit still connected with the nature, thinking, oh, well, in this organism, that's what's going on. And like looking at the different formations of trees and, how the lichen grows on some trees and not on others. So, and just again, taking opportunities, like as I said, it was during COVID and, or just for example, the radiation was one of the things that I had this extraordinary reaction to. And
mhm.
rather than focusing on the pain and the burn and whatnot, focusing on these delightful young women who were there, the radiologists, and just trying to enjoy their story a little bit. Because, of course, everyone was eager for a chat, given the circumstances that we weren't allowed to be together. Yeah. Except
Yeah.
in that situation. Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm,
exactly. And
mm,
I imagine too, there's lots of thinking and emotions that go along with that kind of a cancer diagnosis. You touched on it gave you a bit of a perspective about your life, in that larger way. And
mm.
then in smaller ways too, I imagine it must have helped you, yeah, with the thinking that went on, day to day, sort of moment to moment. Is that true?
Yes. I think I just became lighter, which is quite bizarre in a way.
Mm,
I also came out with a very clear resolution, and you'll think I'm the biggest hypocrite on earth if I tell you, because I thought if I only can achieve one thing now, it's to write the story of my sister. My sister lives with multiple disabilities, and uh, I still have to. I have to say, well, that's still my resolution. It hasn't been accomplished. So, but yeah.
Well, you've got time now, though. I guess that's a nice thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
true. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Um, and it must have been such a I was gonna say isolating experience, to be going through COVID and to be going through cancer at the same time. But it sounds like it didn't really strike you that way.
That's correct.
Mm.
And the more isolating experience was the more personal things of the end of the marriage and business and everything, that was
Mm,
awful. But yeah, no, I couldn't say that, I can't say I had the same experience as many people who speak of the lockdowns here, um, because it wasn't like that for me. It was
mhm.
okay to be on my own and do what I needed to. I mean, I wasn't completely on my own. I had all these medical staff for company. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, and my children got permission to come and, be with me for a bit of help after the surgery and whatnot, so
Oh, good. Oh, that's very good. Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
So when we had our little email exchange, we talked a bit about overing habits.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I tend to focus on talking about overeating. But we can really use that word overing to talk about any unwanted habit. And so you work with clients a little bit on those sorts of things, correct?
Yes, so some of those things I mentioned, for example, people starting in a new position are very anxious about it, so the overthinking and me, I had that experience this year where I was starting something new and I could, pick myself up on that overthinking, or, oh, I kind of, making up stories in my head about, things I was, making as might be problems, for example. And so, yeah, so those kind of things. And sometimes, yeah, just listening to people and, yeah, hearing where their holdups are, I suppose, is, one of the things. And I think almost everybody that I've worked with, their overthinking is a problem. Well, for all of us, we overanalyze, we predict, create all sorts of scenarios. So, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if someone's not familiar with the inside out understanding, where would
Mm.
you begin with them? If, if they're overthinking things?
Right where they are, I think. So
Mm,
they won't come and say, "I'm overthinking." They'll come and say, um, "I've got this project that I wanna start, and I can't make myself start." Yeah. So, yeah, then I'd,
ah,
tap in here and, yeah, kind of try and get them to see what's actually stopping them. Yeah. And then, like a bit of an explanation of, how the mind might be busy protecting them from starting something new and an adventure that, yeah, might have a bit of risk and whatever. I'm trying to keep them in the safe territory of not doing what they want to do. So that might be where I go with something like that. Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah.
And do you find people catch on quite quickly? Like, what's your experience of when they see it?
No, I don't. I think sometimes it's surprising. So I do a coaching session and then I send out an email to them, maybe a week later or so. And although I feel that I've said what I've said in the email, sometimes they'll come back to me and say, "That was so amazing to read that." So it might be the second time, or, it might be, that then we have another follow-up session and they'll catch on to something that's been said the first time. So, yeah, no, that can often happen. And I
Yeah.
suppose too, like I'm not overtly starting off with the three principles, although I'm operating from that understanding. I'm not sort of coming in heavy with that. And I think I am immediately bringing it in, but I'm not using those terms. Yes. Yeah.
Right. Oh, that's such a good way to say it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, I don't have a lot of people. So I have the 2 days where I'm working with the older people, the people in care, and some of those are in palliative care, so they're very close to the end of their life. And then the other people I'm working with, I try and have 5 ongoing clients, and, over time, like, you build up such an extraordinary relationship. So, um, I can't, see how people do so many, but people do it very well. I mean, I've been the recipient of people who have a lot more and, have coached me and been very successful. So I'm not, at all making judgments. I'm just saying for me, this works, having 5 ongoing clients, and then that allows other people to come in, just for, uh a single or a package of 3 or whatever. But I think, in that time when you have an ongoing relationship and you're operating at this depth and you're sort of exploring together, you do become so close. It's just really special. Yes.
Yeah, there's that soul connection that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think for me, Alexandra, I don't know if it's the same for you. I am a bit isolated in that there's far fewer people down this end of the world talking about this, but
Mm,
I have maintained connections with some of the people in America that I studied with initially, and that's been very special. And then last year I went over to the conference in the middle of the year, and that was, like, I think me just sort of wanting to be in the environment with people. It wasn't, thinking, "Oh, I'm going to learn a huge amount," or anything like that, but it was really, yeah, wanting to have that connection at that level. And interesting, Robin, the person who introduced me in the very first place, now lives interstate. We live a long way apart from each other, but
mm.
every phone call we have, which is not often, but every few months or so, that's inevitably what we talk about. Yeah, so we're out understanding. So,
Yeah.
mm,
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, I was in Portland a few weeks ago with Michael Neal and Barbara Patterson.
oh,
They had a little weekend, 2-day sort of workshopy. I never know what to call it. Was it a retreat? Was it a workshop? I don't know. Anyway, and it was the first ever Three Principles thing I had gone to in person. And
oh,
yeah, it was extraordinary to meet other people and have those conversations in person. Yeah, it was really lovely.
mm,
So I can see the attraction of doing that for sure.
mm,
Yeah. Now, you mentioned your sister and her disabilities.
mm,
Um, I wondered, it occurred to me that when there's it's one thing to be dealing with our own challenges in our lives. Like you talked about your cancer diagnosis and the breakdown of your marriage and the end of the business, those are things that are happening to us personally. So I wondered, with someone in your life who themselves is experiencing struggles, what's it been like for you, see, being with her, and has that changed since you've come across this understanding?
yeah, so hugely. Um,
Mm,
I've probably always been the one who's been her big sister. Like, as kids, we shared a room. And interestingly, one of the things that got me to actually sign up on the Little School of Big Change, or one of the issues that I had when I came, was to do with her. She had been overdosed. She lives in a care supported accommodation, and she had been given someone else's drugs on top of her own, and
Oy.
so, arrested, and a staff member and I, did CPR, and she lived, but for a whole weekend, she, stopped breathing, and, that was on and off. So a very critical situation, and I was consumed with anger, not because of the mistake, I make mistakes, but, I was consumed with anger because I perceived the carelessness of the organization in having this happen. The circumstances are not so relevant, but there were circumstances that should not have been the case, um,
Mhm.
and I couldn't get out of this anger. I mean, I was traumatized, obviously, like that was a physical reaction from the time, but I couldn't let it go. Whereas over time, I, came to think quite compassionately about these people who are in jobs where aspects are beyond them, and who hasn't been in a job where aspects are beyond me. Um, and also, I thought, they just don't have, like, how ridiculous, like expecting them to do what they can't do. And then one thing, this was actually something that Amy talked about that really resonated. And I know a lot of us found it quite jarring because we were thinking of very confronting situations. But she was sort of saying, like, if you were that person, you would do the same.
Mm.
That's very confronting when you think of some of the things that people do to other people. And so, yeah, I kind of softened and thought, well, yeah, it would be pretty awful working in a job where you don't actually have the capacity to do all the things that are required. And, the just sort of accepting, well, they were doing the best. But of course, I mean, there's another heart level where my sister almost died because of the way things were being done. Yeah. So
Mhm.
that's an example where I've changed. And I think too, I grew up super protective of her. We all did in our family. We were very protective. I remember back to, when people use pretty ordinary terms to describe someone like Denise and, our defense as siblings. But I think, in more recent years, I was able to have been able to step back a little bit in that I knew I needed to move out of that situation. We were living in the same town, and I knew that for my health, I needed to not be in the situation with the previous marriage, the business, et cetera, that I was now not part of. But that meant leaving my sister, and it was agonizing. I felt very torn about that. Um, but yeah, so a bit of trust, I suppose. I'm not the only one. Other people can do this. People don't have sister. Not everyone has a sister. So yeah, I've moved in that way too. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not pretending I find it easy. I don't. Yeah.
No, no. And then in terms of her suffering, which I don't know if she experiences suffering, but, um, has, the way you see that, if it exists, has that changed? And I guess I'm asking because that's something I struggle with is seeing other people suffering and really getting a lot of thinking about it.
Yeah. Um, I'm not so sure. I think the understanding has certainly made me more compassionate about a lot of things that I might not have had a connection, but I think I've always had that very strong connection with Denise, my sister, and uh, sort of work pretty hard with the organisation. That's often very difficult and challenging in a whole lot of ways because I want things to be better for her, but yeah, I guess, I've expanded a bit because it's not just her. I want things to be better for all people with intellectual disabilities or
Mm.
I listened to a very powerful interview. It was on Changeable. So again, it was Amy Johnson's podcast with a woman called Malene, and I can't
Mm.
remember her surname, but it was on the interconnectedness of all species, and it just had such a powerful effect on me. You know, when there's just a standout one sometimes that will really
Yeah.
trigger something, and that did have such an effect on me. Like even in the way I treat my dogs, I was kind of suddenly thinking, well, why should I, have a more comfortable situation than them and that kind of thing. But she'd made more dramatic changes in her life than I have, way more. But it was something that really affected me in the way she spoke about the
Mm.
interconnectedness of species. Yes.
Oh, cool. Well, thank you for mentioning that. I'll find that episode and put it in the show notes for sure,
Mm.
so people can see it. Yeah. So just as we're coming to the end of our time here, I just wanted to ask, is there anything else that you would like to share that we haven't touched on yet today?
Yeah. Well, probably one of the most important things in my life is my writing. So, I've written 3 books of poetry, and it's interesting to me. It sort of comes back to your first question. Like, I think there are things that I've written about that are based on the 3 principles, like a concept in a poem that I wasn't aware of. Like, they're from back further. But I know too in my writing that I have, it's a different lens. Like everything has changed. And so my poetry is such a joy and satisfaction to me, and it connects me with a whole nother community. So I think, yeah, that's something where I can see the change, but I can also think, oh, well, that's interesting that I could write that back then when I didn't have that understanding in a formal way. Yeah.
Oh, fascinating. To me, that points to the truthfulness of, of this understanding,
Mm,
or the
yeah,
universality, I want to say, almost. Yeah.
yeah. And also our own connection with it, that it's part of us. It's not kind of out there. It's yeah,
Hmm.
it's us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
Mm.
really well said. So where can we find out more about you and your work, Anne?
Okay, well, I have 2 websites. So
Okay.
www.stormtosky.com
Okay.
is my sort of business to do with coaching and funeral work, and www.eagleeson.com.au is my writing website.
Ah, okay. All right. Well, I'll put links to both of those as well in the show notes at unbrokenpodcast.com.
Wonderful.
And
Thanks, Alexandra. And I love hearing from people. So it's all right if people just want to send through an email or whatever. So
oh,
the details
lovely.
are on the websites. Yes.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Well, Anne, this has been a real treat. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me. I've loved to doing it.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye, Alexandra.